afternoon, and welcome to our very first live webcast of Open Book, Open Mind Online. I'm Ariel. I'm one of the librarians at Montclair Public Library, and all of us at the library are super excited to bring you our long-running literary series through this new virtual platform. Over 200 people signed up for this webcast, which is a lot more than we could fit in our auditorium. We are delighted to start off these webcasts with Ada Calhoun. She's the author of the New York Times bestseller, Why Women Can't Sleep, and she'll be in conversation with author, health editor, and video producer Maureen Connolly. Before Maureen and Ada's conversation, I'm going to go over some housekeeping details. There's also a tech tips handout available at the bottom of your screen. Okay. So here, let's play this from the current slide. All right, so this is about how to operate GoToWebinar. Really, whether you're using a phone, a tablet, or computer, you have the same controls. They just look a little different. On your phone, you'll find them at the bottom of your screen. With a tablet, they're on the top at the far right-hand corner. And on a computer, you get a whole little control panel that pops up on the right. So audio will let you control your method of connecting to the sound of the webcast. Screen lets you choose how big the size of the webcast is, whether or not it will fill your whole screen. And then there's a question mark or a chat box, which is your link to my librarian co-host during the webcast. You can click on it to text them for live tech help. You'll also use that text box to send us your questions for the author Q&A at the end. Please include your name and your town in your question. Okay. So my co-host librarians today are Selwa Shami, our Assistant Library Director. Hi,
hello,
Selwa.
everybody. Hi.
And Molly Hone, our Head of Adult Services.
Hello.
Thanks, guys. You won't see Molly and Selwa after this, but they'll be online and available for individual tech support throughout the webcast. Just type your query in the questions area and they'll respond. They'll also be receiving your questions to Ada for the Q&A. And again, please do include your name and your town in your questions. Thanks, Molly and Selwa. Now, back to our program. The Open Book, Open Mind series is sponsored by the Montclair Public Library Foundation, the Montclair Foundation, and the Investors Foundation. We also thank our advisory panel for all of their guidance and support. Now, I'd like to introduce Sue Moline, a board member of the Montclair Public Library Foundation. Welcome, Sue.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks to everybody for joining us on such a gorgeous day. We are thrilled to be here for our inaugural Open Book, Open Mind online. Very exciting. Just want to tell you a little bit about the foundation. Our purpose is very simple. We raise money for the library and all the terrific programs that the library offers, like Open Book, Open Mind, and like the bookmobile that you might have seen in the community. And we're also helping to support many of the digital platforms that I hope you're taking advantage of. Just look on the library website and see film streaming, ebooks, crafts, all kinds of amazing stuff free for you. So please take advantage of that. All gifts of any size have impact for the foundation and for the library. So we hope you'll contribute. If you would like to, please go to the library website, montclairlibrary.org, look for a big red donate button on the top of the page and click away. Thank you, thank you, thank you for your support and enjoy the program.
Thank you, Sue. We so appreciate everything that you and the other people at the foundation do for the library and the town. Now, it's my very great pleasure to introduce Ada Calhoun. In addition to her bestseller, Why We Can't Sleep, Ada has published 2 other very popular, well-received books. One is called Wedding Toasts I'll Never Give, and the other one is St. Mark's Place is Dead, The History of America's Hippest Street. Her freelance articles have appeared in the New York Times, the New Yorker, Time Magazine, National Geographic Magazine, Oh, the Oprah Magazine, and the New Republic, to name just a few. She's originally from New York City. Welcome, Ada. Ada is about to appear. Ada, can you say hello?
For having me.
Okay.
Hi. I think I was muted before, but I'm here now. Hello, how's it going?
Wonderful. I'm also delighted to introduce Ada's conversation partner, Maureen Connolly. Maureen is the editor-in-chief and group vice president of everydayhealth.com, one of the largest digital consumer health sites in the world. She is the author of 3 books of her own and is the host of a new Zoom video series that launches tomorrow from Everyday Health. It's called Boxed In, COVID-19 and Your Mental Health. She's also a resident of Montclair. Welcome, Maureen. I can't hear you, Maureen.
All right, I think you can hear me now.
Okay, that sounds great. And here's the moment you've all been waiting for, Maureen and Ada's conversation. I'll be back for the author Q&A in 30 minutes.
Okay, great.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Ada.
Hi, Maureen. Great to be with you.
Yeah, same here. So, you know, when my friend Jen Moon, she's one of the co-founders of Open Book, Open Mind series, she reached out to ask if I'd be your conversation partner on your best-selling book, Why We Can't Sleep. And of course, I instantly replied yes, and said to Jen, you know, somewhat half-jokingly, that I felt more qualified because I don't think I'd slept since 2017. And that's the year I started the job I have now. I was in the middle of a divorce, raising teenagers, and actually watching my dad decline from Alzheimer's. So, and I'm also part of Generation X, which comprises the women and men born between 1965 and 1980, and it makes them, I guess, 40 to 55 this year. And so I know your research and reporting in the book focuses on Gen X women specifically. But before we get started, I guess I can't help but ask, so how'd you sleep last night?
I slept great. I don't know. I feel guilty, survivor's guilt, admitting that, but yes, I actually got a full 8 hours last night. So.
Okay, I did as well, which is sort of shocking. So your book starts off with you laying out some very personal details about your own midlife crisis. You know, you were waking up each morning wondering why you were so miserable, and seemingly so much in your life was going right, and then yet you felt this other side, which there was so much to focus on that wasn't right. So can you talk to us about that?
Sure. So it was a couple years ago, and I was having a summer, kind of a summer from hell. I'd had a ton of freelance work fall through, and I'm the breadwinner, so I was really scared about money. Had a bunch of credit card debt. I had one kid going to middle school and one going to college, and I felt old. Like I felt exhausted and old, and like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. And I'd wake up at like between 3 and 4:15, say, in the morning, and just stare at the ceiling and think like my career's over, you know, my life's over. It just felt really awful. And it was kind of fortunate that at that moment, I got a call from this editor at Oprah.com saying she was having a hard time. A lot of her friends were having a hard time. Was I by any chance having a hard time too? And could I write about our generation of women and what were the unique pressures and stresses?
So Gen X, the generation, you know, we were latchkey kids. We watched Mary Tyler Moore. We read about missing children on milk cartons. And hopefully we learned about second wave feminism. But define the Gen X female childhood experience. Like, how did it shape our view of the world?
Yeah, so, and that was something I hadn't really thought about until I started working on this story. I thought, you know, where did we get this idea that we were supposed to do so much and do it all so well? And I was thinking back on when we were little girls, especially, and because I focus on women in the book, we were raised with really high expectations. So we were told you can be anything, even president. And in fact, you should reach for the stars. I had one woman I interviewed tell me, she wanted to be a nurse. Her mother said, no, 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 you don't want to be a nurse. You want to be a doctor. There was always this emphasis on achieving more, doing more. Of course, you can have a family and a high-powered job and look great and be social and sexy and fun. And we got this message over and over again, but at the same time, we didn't get a ton of support. So 40% of us were children of divorce. A lot of times that meant very little money available for, say, college. And so we grew up being told we should do so much and that we had so many opportunities. And yet this generation had a huge financial headwind. And so a lot of us didn't get all the things we thought we were going to get as far as career and family, and we blamed ourselves. And I sort of argue maybe some of that was the expectations we grew up with.
Yeah, but I guess the question I have is, so this concept of having it all certainly wasn't new to Gen X. The boomers, certainly, that was part of how they were raised. So what's different about what we heard in that conversation, or that message, I should say? Like, you can have it all, and you need to do it perfectly?
So younger boomers were told have it all, but even like Helen Gurley Brown, who wrote the book Having It All, she didn't have a family. She had a career only. And I think it was more of like a mandate for Gen X. It was something that we were raised believing was our destiny. So our mothers and grandmothers, if they worked, they usually had 9-to-5 jobs. And if they had families, the families were usually out of the house by the time they were in their 40s. So because we delayed childbearing, because we all, many of us worked at the same time as raising kids, a lot of women in their 40s and 50s today find themselves raising kids, taking care of aging parents while working full-time jobs, with the phones going off all day long. And it's a lot of pressure, and it's a different kind of pressure. I'm not saying it's worse than what our mothers and grandmothers went through in their 40s, but it's definitely different.
Yeah, so you set out to interview Gen X women. In fact, you talked to more than 200 women for this book. And I thought your friend Tara really hit on it perfectly. When you have the story in the book, you call and ask her if to say, do you know of any women having a midlife crisis that she could put you in touch with? And then she pauses for a second and says, I'm trying to think of any women I know who are not having a crisis. And then it leads into the story about the iPad mom. I don't think her name was included. You referred to her as an acquaintance, but tell us about that story, because I just thought, oh my God, I can relate to this.
Yes, unfortunately, many could relate to the iPad lady. I hear that often at book events. So the story is that this woman that I interviewed, she told me that she'd been planning a trip for her kids. She had recently separated from their father. She was working like 3 jobs. She was under a ton of money pressure, but she thought, you know what, we're going to go away for the weekend. I'm going to treat them to this weekend away. So they start packing when she gets home Friday night. And she's telling the kids, you got to help me pack. Let's get out, get all the stuff together so we can leave in the morning. And she tells her son, I think he was 11 or 12, says, if you don't put down that iPad and help me, I'm going to smash the iPad. And he doesn't help, and he doesn't help. And she, like as if possessed, goes and finds a hammer and smashes the iPad to pieces in front of him. So many women have told me that they have threatened that or fantasized about that, but they have never actually done it. So there was something about hearing someone actually doing this thing that so many of us have threatened, that was sort of weirdly cathartic. But I laughed when she told me, and she said, you know what, a lot of my friends thought it was funny. It wasn't that funny. She said she was standing over the broken glass and she thought, you know what, I have to find a good therapist like right now.
Yeah, and I think that's the part that, so many of us can relate to, right? So we're having these feelings of just frustration, resentment, anger, rage in some cases, obviously her case, but this idea that there's something impacting us, and yet, so many people are falling into this kind of group where they're not coming clean about it. I was kind of shocked to hear over and over again how many women just, I don't know, they were having a midlife crisis, but either they didn't identify it as such, or they sort of wanted to just kind of brush it away and not talk about it.
Well, and so many of the women that I interviewed, they weren't very comfortable with the idea of the midlife crisis. They said, oh, that's not what I'm going through. You know, men have those. Men get the sports car and the girlfriend, and they get the, you know, college vinyl out of the basement, and that's a midlife crisis. What I'm going through is not that. And yet they would describe these lives that were incredibly difficult. I mean, they were doing caregiving for many people. They had a huge amount of financial pressure. They had no job stability. They were trying to do a million things all at once with very little support. And I thought, you know, if that's not a crisis, I don't know what else deserves to be called a crisis.
Yeah, and I think, so what would you say about the underlying theme of, it's not just this idea that there's pressure to do more, it's this pressure to be perfect on top of it.
Yeah. Well, that was something I heard over and over again from women where they, you know, growing up, they were told you can be anything, look at all the opportunities you have, and that somehow in their minds it morphed into this directive that they must do everything and they must do everything perfectly. So a lot of the women I interviewed were judging themselves not just on whether they were, you know, good parents or whether they were good at their jobs, but they were judging themselves on those things and on were they doing enough to care for aging relatives? Were they working out enough? Were they fit? Did they look good? Were they sexy enough in their marriage? Were they recycling? I mean, it was sort of one thing after the other, and they felt this shame if they weren't getting 10 out of 10 in every single category. And so what I was trying to look at in the book was, where did we get this idea that that's possible? This is, and I argue that it is a generational thing. This is something that women of this age really believe somehow they should be doing.
So did it start, you talked about the Angeli perfume ads. We were raised on, I could bring home the bacon and fry it up in a pan.
Yes, that was one of the songs that a lot of the women I interviewed would just spontaneously sing to me, which was the infamous advertisement for Angeli perfume. You know, I can bring home the bacon, fry it up in the pan, never let you forget you're a man. But there were so many messages I think we got that we should, because we can do all the things, we should do all the things. And the book is an attempt to ask the question, like, really? Like, is that right?
Yeah, or is that reasonable or fair? So I'll get into a little bit later about parenting, but in terms of coping, I want to read this quick short passage about from Christy Coulter, who quit drinking. And she said she had an epiphany. She said, I realize that everyone around me is tanked, but it also dawns on me that women are super double tanked. I see that booze is the oil in our motors, the thing that keeps us purring when we should be making other kinds of noise. Kind of poetic, actually really sad. Scary. I mean, a lot of us can attest to that, right? It's like, you have so few hours in the day and so little time to, I don't know, take care of yourself some days, and you're reaching for that extra glass of wine. Did that come up a lot? I mean, you said the women, when they would exemplify like a lot of people, right? When you included their quotes.
Yeah, so there were a lot of different ways of coping, and one of them was definitely wine. Another was Xanax. Another was like a self-help books, like different ways of practicing mindfulness or meditation. And while those things are wonderful, there was a certain emphasis on them in these women's lives that they found almost like another burden. So a lot of women told me, okay, I'm also not meditating enough. I'm not mindful enough. There was this other pressure to not only do all these things, but also to be very calm about it, very fulfilled and satisfied, and have all the inner peace. So it can be its own, the coping mechanisms can be their own kind of burden sometimes. Yeah,
and so I guess, when you say that women get to middle age and they realize they actually, did any of them admit, like, maybe I don't want it all, or it kind of feels like a little dirty secret to share this because, I don't know, maybe it's a betrayal to the sisterhood or to themselves? Like, what would you say?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was something that so many women in all kinds of different situations would use really similar terminology. So I had one woman who, she had 3 children, she had this long marriage, she was active in her community, and she would like whisper to me basically like, I don't have a career. Like, what did I do wrong that I don't also have a career? Meanwhile, I'm having breakfast with a woman in Texas who has this great career, and she never found a partner or had children like she thought she would and like she'd hoped. And she said, again, this sort of shame, like, what did I do wrong? Why don't I also have this other thing? And so the book is an argument for the fact that it's quite difficult to get even some things, much less all the things, by the time you're 40. And so it shouldn't be a surprise to us if we're struggling.
Yeah, but what were the messages we got? And maybe you could build on that just a little bit, because it seems like, within this generation, we have our own sets of like wanting to aim so high, being terribly disappointed in ourselves when that doesn't happen. And I just think that's just such a loop, a really bad loop that so many of us have found ourselves in.
Yeah, it really is. And what I kept hearing was that women were blaming themselves for their lack of attainment. And what I argue, looking at the numbers, looking at the financial realities that we grew up with, is that there were a lot of forces at work. It wasn't just our own lack of working hard enough that played into what we got or what we didn't get. So one of the numbers that I found really striking was only about 1 in 4 women of our generation will out-earn her father. You'd think it would be much higher given our education rates, given how the workplaces have opened up to women. But there was like one statistic after another that I saw that really pointed to this idea that we are the first downwardly mobile generation. And it's not because we didn't work hard enough. It's a lot of different things that were just far beyond our control.
So the balance between parenting, motherhood and a career, in both camps, there's a lot on you at any given point, right? Even having a kid go through school these days, I wrote this down, you said you took your SATs hungover, and now, we're grooming our kids for college from birth, right? Whether we want to be or not, somehow we all, find ourselves buying into whatever this is. And, one woman talked about doing PowerPoints while creating end of the year gift baskets for teachers, who deserve them very much, as we're all realizing now.
Indeed.
More so. But my God, that's so much pressure. So like, I don't know. What did you learn about that? What's the way
so right. So, and so in the book, just I want people to know, like, I talk to people who don't have kids and who do have kids, and they're both facing these different pressures. But the ones who do have kids often were trying to do things for their kids that were not done for them. So if they were latchkey kids, who were left to fend for themselves and heat up their own Hot Pockets or whatever it was and watch 8 hours of television a day, which I definitely was, their kids are going to have like the balance bike and the enrichment classes and tons of attention and, lots of story hours and all these wonderful things. And I'm not saying it's bad. We've gotten this rep for being helicopter parents, but I think it was in some ways an overcompensation for what we didn't get when we were young. I saw one number that was like the number of hours mothers today who work full time spend with their kids is actually greater than stay-at-home moms in the 70s. So we're working harder to spend quality time with our kids, even though we have way more hours that are tied up outside of the home. And I think that speaks to the fact that we're trying to do so much for our kids, and as parents, with time we don't necessarily have.
When it comes to finances too, that's another area that I think a lot of women feel very stuck, right? So living in the world today, requires obviously, being able to pay for health insurance or having a job that will do that for you, a mortgage, school, savings, and then retirement. And so this constant struggle between like, I didn't choose this, maybe a lot of people were saying, but I'm here and it's a job now. And so there's frustration there. With the people who had did anybody come out on the other side of it, meaning like because of kind of pulling the rug out from their life, they wound up making a better choice and wound up happier?
Well, it's so funny because, I think it's funny, it's so tragic, but like because of what we're in right now, I think it's confirmed what a lot of the women I interviewed were saying, which was that they were living really on the edge. They already were paycheck to paycheck, and they had this sense that there was not a safety net, there was not this sense of security. And I think what's going on right now, they're pointing to is like that the rug has been pulled out from under so many of us, whether we had taken the safe path, as a lot of women in this generation tried to do and got the corporate job or whatever, or went off on their own and were riskier. So I think we're kind of all in the same boat, whether or not we tried to play it safe.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so I guess speaking of this pandemic pause, do you think it's going to help us gain even more perspective? What are your thoughts?
You know, it's so funny, like when I was doing these interviews, so many of the women I talked to really felt like they were at a breaking point already. So they already felt really overwhelmed. They already felt really scared about money. They already felt like they were doing so much more than anyone around them. And I think, and some of them said, you know, I kind of wish I could just blow it all up and start over, start from scratch. And so as horrible as this is, it is in some ways this fulfillment of this desire to just start over again, you know, because everybody's at home, because there's no guarantees. Like, I think everybody has to kind of build back up, and I guess there's an opportunity to build back up in a different way and not repeat the same patterns. But it's certainly not how anybody, I don't think, would want this opportunity to present itself.
Yeah. So if you had to be like specific about it, what do you think will change? The pressures to get into good school, or, you know, schools. I mean, good schools are obviously, you know, a good thing, but just the amount that we're putting on ourselves financially or time-wise.
Well, one thing that I know a lot of people that I talked to said was that they wish that they could make their own hours. They wish that that flex time was available and that work from home was available, you know, because especially if they were taking care of aging parents and kids, they wanted that flexibility. And now that everybody has been sent home, I think that we're seeing that can work. I mean, it's not maybe ideal for a lot of us, but that it's feasible in a way that I think might convince employers to extend that freedom and that flexibility once this is over.
I have to say I agree. That would be one of the, you know, silver linings of this, if we get that flexibility that so many of us are looking for. So, you know, I guess to kind of summarize, like, what is it that you got out of this project? You know, you talked about the fact that it helped you to overcome your own midlife crisis, or at least see life in a much different perspective. And maybe you can talk about that and what you hope other women will come away with.
Yeah. So for me, just hearing other women's stories and having these really frank conversations, and also doing all this research into the financial realities and the path of our generation, which has been very fraught and filled with many road bumps, and also into perimenopause, which I had never even heard of before I started working on that Oprah magazine story. And I got really mad. I thought, you know, how is it that I'm an educated woman, I live in a city, and I've grown up going to the doctor every year, and I didn't know anything about what was in store for me menopause wise. There's a whole very long chapter in the book about all that. So finding out about that, talking to other women, getting some perspective really did fix my midlife crisis. It really healed me in this way. And so what I've been hearing before my book tour was unfortunately cut a bit short by all this, but I did get to fortunately go to a number of cities and hear from different women. They said that it at least got rid of the shame that they had felt and made them feel more of camaraderie with their fellow middle-aged women, and a sense that we're all kind of in this together.
Yeah, so I guess that getting rid of the shame, is it because they were reaching out? So, okay, the book aside, but like within your own community, I mean, is your benefit from kind of fessing up and saying, you know what, this is what I'm going through, dealing with?
I think it's profound. Yeah, I think just the act of having conversations with other women and realizing, oh, you're all scared about money. Oh, you're all dealing with perimenopausal symptoms and you didn't really know what they were. I think there are opportunities that present themselves to help one another, at least to commiserate. But often what I found is that women who read the book then gave the book to their partners, their sisters, their mother-in-law, and then there was this greater empathy for what they themselves were going through, and there was more of an ability to say, it's not just me.
Yeah, and it's not just me, and I'm not going to be as hard on myself, right? About
yes
this, yeah, which is
exactly.
so. I want to read just to kind of, I know we only have a few more minutes here before we're going to take questions from everybody.
Sure.
So toward the end of the book, you said, you know, on my 42nd birthday, I woke to the sound of my husband and son whispering and the smell of brewing coffee. When I went into the next room, I found it had been decorated with streamers and a happy birthday banner. On the table sat presents and a cake. Later, friends, many of whom I've now known for decades, came over and laughed and talked at a table full of platters and food and bottles of wine, our kids running in and out of the room. That afternoon, I went to the Price Chopper, and standing there in the parking lot, I looked up at the clear blue sky and had a strange, unfamiliar feeling, joy. So I don't know if you could maybe add to that.
I mean, I think that's what we have. That's what's on offer is just these moments of appreciating what we have and seeing it as a real gift. And you know, it makes those moments, I think, make all the other hard stuff maybe a little easier.
Yeah, right. And kind of taking note of them, right, more often than we might have before when we were too focused on doing our to-do lists, right?
I think so.
So, Ariel, I know you want to start taking questions, but I just want to give a shout out too. When I got to the end of this, I absolutely love that in your appendix, Ada's appendix, it starts with suggestions of a midlife crisis mixtape. So she has a list of songs from Tracy Chapman and Fleetwood Mac, which was totally killing me when I read this. And I thought if you're a publisher, like, you know, I'm sure it'll be reprinted again at some point, but you should probably add, I was going to vote for Donna Summer's disco arrangement. The song is called MacArthur Park, but it's otherwise known as Someone Left the Cake Out in the Rain. That
Yes.
sums up the ultimate experience. Yeah. So anyway, thank you so much, Ada.
Thank you. Great questions.
Okay, well, thank you, Ada and Maureen, for that really delightful conversation. So it's time for the Q&A period, and Ada's going to answer as many questions as we have time for. And Maureen, please feel free to jump in.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to look at the questions here. Here's a question. It's sort of a comment, actually, from Michelle. She doesn't have a town. Thank you for your book. It was so helpful and eye-opening for me. I'm a 42-year-old with a 6-year-old girl, and I want to make sure I don't put these same expectations on her. Any thoughts around striking that balance between dream big, you can do anything, and go do everything?
Thank you. That's a lovely comment and a great question. Also, one that I've heard a few times and that I've thought about often myself. I have a son who's 13. I have a stepson who's 26, and you know, I think about them and their friends as a millennial and a Gen Z. And what I see in them is a lot more realism than I think we had. I don't know if it's because they watched us, what we dealt with, but both those generations seem a little more clear on what's possible and what's not possible. I had someone who was in the book, the woman who was told she should be a doctor, not a nurse. She came to my book event in Washington, D.C., and she brought her daughter, and she was like pointing out like, oh, look, that's me in the book. And she had said to her daughter, and has continued to say, I really want you to be happy. I want you to find your own path and find your own joy and your own sense of satisfaction, however that comes. And I think that is not necessarily how it was phrased to us. And I think that's a very good phrasing. You know, it could be a lot of different things. It could be a family, it could be a career, it could be both. It could, you know, but that the pressure isn't on those kids as hard as it was on us, I don't think, to do all the things, do them all perfectly without being tired, at least.
Okay, thank you. So here's a question from Deb Levy. Hey, Deb,
Hi,
who's
Deb.
from Montclair, and she says she wants to know, I'm curious about the demographics of the 200 women interviewed. Did they range along the socioeconomic spectrum, race and ethnic diversity, educational background? Just wonder how much of this is a cultural phenomenon specific to one culture. Not that it's not worthy of study, just wonder how widespread it is.
It's a really good question, and it was something that was incredibly important to me, having read a lot of books that I felt were geared only toward white women, only toward women on the coast, only toward rich women. And what I was trying to do with the book is I narrowed it by two different categories. One was I tried to go for middle class, so kind of lower middle class to upper middle class, but women who are raised with a basic expectation of success in life, but not people who were just phenomenally wealthy, not people who were struggling with a lot of issues around poverty, which I've done a lot of reporting on, and I know is a whole extra book's worth of problems. But then within those categories, the women in their 40s and 50s who were sort of middle class-ish, I made sure it looked like America. So I worked very hard to make sure that that the percentages of, racially and religiously and in terms of region broke down to about what the country is. So I think I got every state, and that was really, really important to me. And what I tried to do was just to sort of look at what we all had in common. I think there's so much division in this country. There's so much like Republican versus Democrat, North versus South, that I wanted to look at the category of things we could all say we had in common. We watched Facts of Life, for example. We had like jean jackets in all the states, and just to say like these are things we're all facing together.
Okay, thank you. So Sylvia from West Orange has a question for you. Why did you pick that particular title for this book?
Well, it's funny because initially the book was called The New Midlife Crisis, which was the name of the article that I wrote for Oprah.com that became the book. But as I was working on it, I sort of, it sounded a little magazine-y, and I thought, oh, it'd be nice to have a slightly more like lyrical title. And I kept thinking about this postcard that I had over my bed when I was a teenager, and it said the words "Why We Can't Sleep," and it had all these boxes, like a mosaic behind the words, that were all of these horrible things, like a hurricane, a mushroom cloud, like, and I thought about that postcard, and I thought it kind of sums it up nicely. Just here are all the reasons. If you're struggling in middle age, here are 9 chapters worth of reasons why that might be. Perimenopause, money, relationships, and so that's what I did. Now there are people who like see the book and think it's a sleep guide, and then they go on Goodreads and like 1 star. I did not fall asleep immediately upon reading the book. So that was a pitfall of the title, but I still like it, I think.
Okay, here's one. This is pretty neat. Rebecca in France, originally from Montclair, spreading our range. Okay.
Good.
Something that struck me was the example of the Challenger disaster and how it affected our generation, but no one talked about it even though the entire school was watching it. How does the fact that we were stuck between the non-talking about issues and the over-presence of dangers affect us?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it was a very dangerous time in America. And I grew up in New York City, grew up in the Lower East Side. It was the like peak murder rate was when I was in high school. It was a time of high crime. Abuse numbers were like through the roof. That we had as you mentioned, Maureen, the milk cartons with the missing kids on them all the time. There was this kind of static, like background static of danger. And yet there wasn't processing of it the way that I think our kids have been taught to process it. Like every time there's a school shooting, like the dance teacher has them like dance it out, like at my son's school. And there's all this talking about emotions and feelings. And that was a time when kids were really left on their own. And I use the Challenger as an example, but where like we watched it in the classroom, like they wheeled in the big boxy television and said, watch this. And then we watched it and it was horrible. And then they were like, switch the TV off. And in many schools around the country, that was the end of the discussion. And I actually reached out to my alumni from my elementary school, which is a public school in Manhattan. And I said, does anybody else remember like a counselor, something like an assembly? They're like, no. And many of them had even worse stories than I did, where like one teacher like started laughing hysterically, and like it was just like kids were not nurtured emotionally in that era in the same way that I think they are now.
Okay. Here's one from Nola in Montclair. Can you speak a little about the racial demographics of the women you interviewed?
Yeah, so again, it's like, I tried to make it look like America. So it is, I can get out my spreadsheets, but it's, like 30% non-white, which is about what the US is. And I tried to get people from every state. And in some places I pull out issues that are specific to different racial demographics. So for example, Black and Hispanic women are hit much harder by a lot of the perimenopausal symptoms that I talk about. There's been a lot of research breaking down different racial groups and how they react to menopause. And whereas for like white women, it's about, I think, 9 or 10 years that these symptoms last. For Black and Hispanic women, it's more like 10 to 13 years. So I tried to pull those things out where I thought they were relevant or significant.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. So here's one from Patricia in Naples, Florida. Really appreciate this conversation, hearing it from others. I have not read book yet. My question is, are we calling midlife crisis the things / situations that happen to every generation when a woman meets her midlife? A menopause, i.e. menopause, teens, aging or dying parents, divorce, career disappointments. I'm hoping we can sleep better by accepting it is what it is, or am I Pollyanna? Please write another bullet point books. Put it in perspective. How to purge before you sleep. Love from Sleepless in Naples, Florida.
Sleepless in Naples, Florida is a good sign off. I think there's been a lot of emphasis on like practicing gratitude and silver lining and all this kind of stuff. And for this book, I really tried to spend a long time laying out the case for if you're having a hard time, here is why that might be. Because one thing that I felt when I was going through this was this sense like I shouldn't be upset. I shouldn't be unhappy. I have all these wonderful gifts in my life. And I did feel very grateful. I do feel very grateful for them. But when I was doing these interviews, so many of the women said to me, I have no right to complain. I'm so lucky. I have so much going for me. It's not like I'm in a war-torn region. It's not like, I'm going through the Great Depression or there's not a war raging that I'm impacted by right now. And the book is a little bit of an answer to that. Like, of course, you can take it for granted that yes, we feel lucky that we're in this prosperous country and all that. But that doesn't mean there's not still things that are very difficult at this stage of life. Many things that were difficult, like you say, for our mothers and grandmothers and great grandmothers too, menopause, aging parents, kids. But this generation, and it's going to be true for millennials and Gen Z probably also, because of the way we've timed things out, because of the economy, because of all these other factors, we're dealing with everything all at once in a way that's different. And that's why I'm calling it a new midlife crisis. We're dealing with work, money, kids, stress, all this stuff as breadwinners in many cases as women for the first time, and all while going through perimenopause. And that there's just something about that that's for a lot of women I talk to is very intense.
Okay. So a couple people have asked me to correct certain things. Michelle is from Montclair, and Sylvia wants me to say that her name is Sylvia. I mispronounced it as Sylvie, and I'm sorry about that, Sylvia.
Hello, Sylvia.
Okay, here is Angelique from Montclair. This might be redundant, but can you talk about how the midlife crisis relates to a sense of identity?
Well, I can say that a lot of the women that I talked to, they didn't want to admit that they were in middle age or were going through perimenopause or menopause. Like one woman was having really terrible symptoms around her change of life, and she was like whispering to me about it. And I was like, why are you whispering? Like, why is this such a secret? And she said, even just the word menopause, it sounds like you're closing up shop as a sexual being. And she felt a lot of shame around it. So, and also a lot of women described to me feeling invisible, feeling like their identity as a powerful woman out in the world was changing as they got older, and that they had identified as like young and sexy or whatever, and that when they felt that changing, that they felt their identity threatened. So I think it's something worth talking about.
Here's another question. This is from Lisa. She's in upstate New York right now. Thanks for the talk. I'm from New York City, but recently moved back from the Netherlands. How relevant is American culture versus, for example, European culture in your assessments? The Dutch have a live to work culture, and I wonder if you also interviewed Europeans for the book.
So I didn't do like a cross-cultural study at all, but there is a woman that I quote in the book who was a friend of mine in New York, and she moved back to Sweden while I knew her, and she wrote to me and she said that she was able to think for the first time in years because she had free healthcare, and her child had this amazing free preschool, and she would like drop her daughter off to these like adorable little houses every morning, and they would eat this fantastic food, and she would come home so happy, and all these things were taken care of for her. She said she actually was able to like be creative again and able to just feel this like relaxation in her spirit. So I do think there is something to what you say. There is, and I'd be curious to hear more about women in other countries and what they go through at this stage, and if it's slightly leavened by a little more support in the community.
Okay, so one of the great benefits of being the host is that I get to ask my own question. And the question I have is, how has having this best-selling book changed your life? Has it made your life easier? Has it created new stressors? What's it like for you, Ada?
It's pretty great. I have to say, it's really made me so happy. So I've been a writer for 20 some odd years. I've worked for like almost every newspaper and magazine, and I'm like always like just work hard all the time. And I don't expect big success or whatever. I ghostwrite a lot of books. So I had I think 6 or 7 bestsellers as a ghostwriter. So I knew that I had done that. I had helped make that book that got that attention. But it was really different when my agent called me and was like, I'm sending you something, like, look, and it was my name on the bestseller list. It felt really great. It just, I don't know what I can say beyond that. And it's been like messages almost every day from women who said this book helped them in some way. It made them see what they were going through in more perspective. It made them feel less ashamed of where they were. And there's no other reason to write, as far as I'm concerned, than to feel less alone and make other people feel less alone. So this book seems to be doing that for some people, and that's been really great.
Well, thank you so much, Ada and Maureen. That's all we have time for. We so appreciate you being our first webcast conversation at the very first debut of Open Book, Open Mind online.
Well, I'm really honored by this. I'm a huge fan of libraries. When in other times when I'm able to be in libraries, I am in them every day. So bless you for the work you're doing. And Maureen, it was so great to meet you, and your questions were fantastic. So
thank you. I want to know, can I ask one more question, Ariel? I want to know what's coming up for you, Ada. What are you working on now?
I'm trying to learn how to. A couple things. I'm trying to write this poet biography. Maybe ghostwrite another book, and I'm also trying to learn how to write for like TV. I've always wanted to learn how, and right now I'm like have some time. So there's been some interest in this as a TV show, which I think could be really fun. So I'm like working on screenplays.
That's great.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you both.
Okay.
All right, so thanks so much to everybody for tuning into our first webcast of Open Book, Open Mind online. And our next webcast is going to take place on June 7th at 4 p.m. with Jesse Wegman, who is a member of the New York Times editorial board. And he has a very timely and provocative new book called Let the People Pick the President, The Case for Abolishing the Electoral College, with Jim Johnson, who's the attorney, activist, and former U.S. Treasury official. And meanwhile, don't forget your handouts for a cheat sheet on our participants, the book, the subject, and a list of read-alike titles available for free download through the library's website. I actually did put in some of the titles that were in your handout, you know, at the end, your bibliography.
Okay.
So finally, please consider buying books to support our authors and our partner, Watch On Booksellers, which offers free curbside delivery in Montclair. You can also borrow digital copies of the book from the library while the building is closed. So stay safe, everybody, and keep reading.